Ethan asked me to sit down at the kitchen table and ended our 14-year marriage in less than 30 seconds. No yelling, no apology, just a list. He wanted a divorce. He wanted the house, the company, the cars, everything. Then he looked at me and said I could keep our son. Not custody, not shared parenting. He said it like Lucas was something he did not want to deal with anymore. I remember nodding and thinking one thing very clearly. He has no idea what he is about to sign. At that moment, Ethan believed he was walking away with everything. What he did not know was that 3 years earlier, while he was busy building his image, I had discovered the truth about his company, and I had been waiting quietly ever since. Everyone in that room saw a woman being discarded. What they did not see was a trap already set. And the worst part for Ethan was this: I never stopped him. Let me start with who I am, because everyone always gets that wrong. My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 36 years old. I was married to Ethan Whitmore for 14 years. To the outside world, I was a stay-at-home wife, supportive, quiet, invisible. At industry events, people shook Ethan's hand and smiled at me politely, as if I were part of the furniture that came with his success. What they never saw was the woman behind the scenes, the one who built the systems that kept his company alive. I met Ethan when I was 21. I had just finished a legal assistant program and was working at a small firm in Phoenix. I understood contracts, numbers, fine print, deadlines. Ethan understood charm, vision, talking people into believing in things that did not exist yet. We were a perfect match, at least on paper. When we married, he promised me a future. He talked about building something big, something lasting. He asked me to help him in the beginning, just temporarily. I left my job. I told myself I was investing in us. Temporary turned into years. I handled bookkeeping, payroll, vendor contracts, loan paperwork. I organized meetings, managed timelines, fixed mistakes he never even knew he made. When things went right, Ethan was brilliant. When things went wrong, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, making sure no one else found out. And then Lucas was born. I did everything: mother, manager, mediator. I kept our life running so smoothly that Ethan began to believe it ran itself. That is what happens when you make someone's success look effortless. They start to believe you are unnecessary. By the time Ethan sat me down at that kitchen table, he already saw me as a cost, not a partner, not a mother to his child, a liability he wanted removed cleanly. As he spoke, I noticed small details. He did not look at me. He had papers stacked neatly beside him, already prepared. He had practiced this, probably with his lawyer, probably with someone else encouraging him. He spoke about division of assets like a man who believed everything was already his. I asked one question, just one: is there someone else? He hesitated for half a second, not long enough to deny it convincingly. That told me everything I needed to know. I nodded. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. That confused him. He expected resistance, tears, begging. Instead, I said quietly, "If that is what you want." His shoulders relaxed. That was his mistake. What Ethan saw in that moment was a woman giving up. What he did not see was a woman who had been preparing for this conversation long before he ever imagined leaving. I walked upstairs that night and sat on the edge of the bed Lucas had slept in since he was a toddler. I listened to the house, the same house Ethan believed he owned, the same walls that had heard every late-night phone call, every argument, every financial conversation. He assumed I forgot. That night, I made a decision of my own. I would not fight him the way he expected. I would not demand what looked fair on the surface. I would give him exactly what he asked for. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone take everything they think they want. And if you are wondering why I am telling you this now, why I sound so calm describing the worst moment of my life, it is because this story does not end where he thought it did. This was only the beginning. When Ethan told me he was keeping everything, I realized something almost comforting. He truly believed I had nothing of my own, no leverage, no identity outside of him. That belief did not come from arrogance alone. I had helped build it. People like to say I was just a stay-at-home wife. It sounds small, safe, easy to dismiss. And that is exactly why it worked. What they never saw was how the company actually ran. From the outside, Ethan Whitmore was a visionary CEO, confident, charismatic, always talking about growth and momentum. Investors loved him, clients trusted him. He had that voice that made people lean forward and believe. Behind that voice was me. I was the one who made sure payroll went out on time, even when cash flow was tight. I was the one who caught errors in contracts before they became lawsuits. I tracked every vendor payment, every loan, every deadline. I knew which numbers mattered and which ones were just there to impress people at dinner parties. I did not have a title. I did not have a salary. I had access. Ethan used to joke that I was better with numbers than his accountants. He meant it as a compliment. What he did not understand was that I was better because I paid attention. I listened. I remembered. I kept records. I knew where everything was buried. At first, I told myself this was temporary, that once the company stabilized, I would go back to work, that my legal background mattered, that I mattered. Years passed. Lucas grew up, the company grew, and my name stayed off everything. At events, people would ask Ethan how he did it. He would smile and talk about risk and instinct and long nights. Sometimes he would squeeze my hand and say he could not have done it without my support. That was the closest I ever got to recognition. Support, not contribution. There is a difference. The longer I stayed invisible, the easier it became for Ethan to forget I was there at all. He stopped asking my opinion. Then he stopped informing me of decisions. Eventually, he stopped pretending my work was work. When problems came up, he expected me to fix them quietly. When things went well, he accepted praise without hesitation. That was the pattern. And patterns tell you everything if you watch long enough. I remember the moment I understood how little he valued me. It was a small thing, a casual thing. We were at a dinner with investors. One of them asked a technical question about a clause in a contract they were about to sign. Ethan laughed and waved it off, said legal details were boring. I answered the question, clearly, accurately. The investor nodded and thanked me. Ethan smiled tightly and changed the subject. Later that night, in the car, he told me not to undermine him in public. That was when it clicked. I was not his partner. I was a tool, useful when quiet, dangerous when visible, and I adapted. I stopped correcting him in public. I stopped offering opinions unless asked. I made myself smaller, more agreeable, less noticeable, not because I believed him, but because I was learning him. People assume submission is weakness. Sometimes it is surveillance. I watched how he handled money, how he talked to bankers, how he signed papers without reading them, because he trusted his own instincts more than facts. I watched how he dismissed warnings, how he brushed off concerns as negativity. Most importantly, I watched how comfortable he became, believing I did not understand any of it. By the time Lucas was a teenager, Ethan barely noticed what I did all day. He assumed things worked because he was successful. He never asked why they worked. And then came the night that changed everything. It was 3 years before the divorce. Ethan was working late again. That had become normal by then. I was reconciling accounts at the kitchen table, just cleaning things up like I always did. I noticed a transfer that did not make sense. Then another. Then a pattern. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. That there was probably an explanation. There always was. But something felt wrong. I stayed up that night. 1 hour turned into 3. 3 turned into morning. By the time the sun came up, I was surrounded by documents and numbers that did not line up. That was the first time I realized the company was not as strong as Ethan claimed. I did not confront him. Not then. Not ever. Instead, I learned something far more valuable. Ethan did not just underestimate me. He depended on that underestimation to protect himself. And that meant, the moment he decided I was disposable, he had already lost. Because everything he believed about me was built on the assumption that I was not paying attention. Here is the hook no one saw coming. The woman Ethan thought owned nothing was the only person who knew exactly how much he owed. And from that moment on, I stopped being his wife. I became his quiet witness. And witnesses do not forget. This was not the story of a woman who lost herself in a marriage. This was the story of a woman who learned exactly when to stay silent, and exactly when to let a man destroy himself. The humiliation did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, disguised as practicality, as fairness, as things that supposedly made sense after a divorce announcement. The morning after Ethan told me he wanted everything, I woke up to find my clothes missing from the bedroom closet. Not all of them, just enough to send a message. My dresses were gone. my work blouses, shoes I had worn for years. In their place were a few folded items laid neatly on the guest bed down the hall, like an overnight bag someone packs for a hotel stay they never intend to extend. Ethan did not say anything about it. He did not need to. The house had already decided where I belonged. That night, he told me it would be better if I slept in the guest room while we figured things out. His words. Figured things out. As if this were temporary. As if I had not just been erased from my own life. I moved without arguing. I learned long ago that protest only fed his sense of control. The guest room was smaller, no locks, no privacy, a room meant for visitors, not for someone who had lived there for over a decade. I lay awake that first night, listening to the sounds of a house that suddenly felt hostile. Every creak, every shift of air. I had never felt so foreign in a place I knew by heart. The next humiliation came disguised as responsibility. Ethan canceled my personal credit card. He said it calmly, like he was doing me a favor. We need to separate finances, Claire. It is cleaner this way. Then he canceled the joint card. I found out at the grocery store, standing at the register with Lucas beside me, the cashier politely telling me the card had been declined. Ethan answered my text hours later. Oh, I forgot to mention that. We should keep expenses separate from now on. Separate. Like I had not been managing those expenses for years. Like I had not been the one making sure bills were paid and accounts balanced. Like I had not earned access to my own life. Lucas noticed everything. The card, the silence, the way his father barely looked at me anymore. Teenagers pretend not to see things, but they absorb everything. I could feel his confusion growing, and that hurt more than any insult Ethan could throw at me. And then came his mother. Margaret Whitmore arrived 3 days later, unannounced. Perfect hair. Perfect posture, sympathy practiced to perfection. She hugged me lightly, like you hug someone you are not sure you respect. I always knew this would happen eventually, she said, patting my hand. Some women just are not built to keep a man like Ethan satisfied. She walked through the house like an inspector, opening drawers, looking at furniture, assessing what belonged to her son and what did not. When I told her I would pack my own things, she smiled tightly and said she was only trying to help. Help came in the form of black garbage bags. She handed them to me one by one, and started deciding what I could take. Old clothes. Fine. Family photos. A few. Anything Ethan had purchased was not mine. Anything of value was a marital asset and would stay. At one point she picked up my grandmother's recipe box. She turned it over in her hands like she was considering it. I took it from her without asking. That was the first time I saw irritation cross her face. When I was done, my life fit into 7 bags. She tied them herself, as if taking out trash. If I had not already learned how invisible I was, that would have done it. The humiliation did not stop there. It escalated. Ethan began to speak about me in the third person, even when I was in the room. He told Lucas that his mother was being emotional, that I was making things harder than they needed to be, that I was struggling to accept reality. Reality was whatever version benefited him most. And then he brought her into the house. She walked in like she belonged there, confident, young, barely older than the company Ethan claimed to have built for us. She smiled at me like she was being polite, like she was doing me a kindness by acknowledging my existence. She wore my apron while making smoothies in my blender. She sat at my kitchen counter, scrolling on her phone, while Ethan stood behind her, hands resting on her shoulders. He did not introduce her. He did not need to. The message was clear. You are already gone. That night, I stood in the guest room holding one of the garbage bags Margaret had packed and felt something inside me go completely still, not broken, not angry, resolved. Here is the hook that kept me breathing through those days. Every insult made Ethan more confident. Every humiliation made him more careless. He believed I was shrinking. What he did not realize was that I was measuring every comment, every decision, every assumption. He was showing me exactly how he treated people he thought were powerless. And power, I was learning, is not about who speaks the loudest. It is about who knows the most. By the time Ethan suggested I might want to find somewhere else to stay, I already understood something crucial. He was not trying to hurt me. He was trying to erase me. And men who erase people never check what is left behind. They assume nothing dangerous could survive being thrown away. That was the mistake he would never recover from. Because while he was busy humiliating me out of my own life, he was also confirming exactly what kind of man he was, and exactly how far he would fall once the truth stopped protecting him. The house was no longer mine. But the story was, she did not knock the first time she walked into the kitchen. I was standing at the counter early that morning, still half asleep, still adjusting to the idea that this house no longer belonged to me in any real way. I heard footsteps behind me, light, confident, too comfortable. When I turned around, she was already there, young, polished, wearing leggings that cost more than my weekly groceries, and a smile that was almost apologetic. Almost. She held up my blender like it was hers. "I hope you do not mind." Ethan said I could make a smoothie. Ethan said. That was how I learned she had moved from being a rumor to being a presence. He did not introduce her. He did not need to. She stood in my kitchen, using my appliances, wearing my apron, the one my grandmother had given me years ago. She tied it around her waist without thinking, like it was natural, like this was already her space. I watched her pour fruit into the blender, her movements practiced, relaxed. She did not look at me again. She did not ask my name. She already knew it. She just did not think it mattered. Ethan walked in behind her, rested his hands on her shoulders, kissed the side of her head. He glanced at me briefly. "The way you look at furniture you are considering replacing." "This is Sienna," he said casually. That was it. No explanation, no shame, no acknowledgement of the fact that I was still his wife. Just a name dropped into the air like a formality. Sienna smiled at me then. A polite smile, the kind you give someone you believe is already on their way out. It did not hurt the way people imagine betrayal should hurt. It was worse than that. It was humiliating. They sat at the counter together, laughing softly, sharing a screen on her phone while I stood there holding a mug I no longer wanted. He spoke to her the way he used to speak to me, light, interested, proud. I realized with a strange sense of clarity that this was not about love. It was about replacement. Within days, she was everywhere. Her shoes by the door, her toiletries in the bathroom, her clothes hanging in the closet that used to be mine. She rearranged the pantry, threw out spices I had used for years, painted over the sage green kitchen walls I had spent weeks choosing, replacing them with flat gray. Builder gray, the color of no personality, no memory, no attachment. I wanted to scream when I saw it. Instead, I said nothing. That silence confused them. Sienna acted like she was doing me a favor by being kind. She would ask if I needed anything, if I was okay, always in front of Ethan, always sweet enough to make me look unreasonable if I reacted. Once, she asked if I planned to move out soon. Not rudely, casually, like she was asking about the weather. Ethan backed her up that night. He said it might be healthier if I found my own place while we sorted things out. His words, my own place, as if I had already left. Lucas heard everything. He started staying in his room more, headphones on, door closed. He did not ask questions, but I could see the way his eyes followed them when they laughed together, the way his shoulders tensed when Sienna touched his father. Children know when something is wrong long before they can explain it. That was the moment I understood the true purpose of her presence. She was not there to love Ethan. She was there to push me out faster, and she was very good at it. Ethan became bolder with her around. He criticized me openly, commented on my mood, told me I was making things awkward. He framed everything as concern, for Lucas, for stability, for peace. Peace, apparently, required my disappearance. What they did not understand was that every day she stayed in that house, every line she crossed, every boundary she ignored, she made Ethan more arrogant, and arrogance makes people careless. Here is the truth no one tells you about humiliation. If you survive it without breaking, it sharpens you. I started paying attention to details again. Not the emotional ones, the practical ones. The way Ethan signed documents without reading them. The way Sienna encouraged him to rush decisions. The way they both spoke about the future as if nothing could go wrong. They were building something new on top of something rotten. And they assumed I was too small to notice. One night, as I lay in the guest room listening to their laughter drift down the hallway, I realized something important. They thought they were winning because I was quiet, but quiet does not mean empty. Quiet means waiting. If you have ever been replaced in your own life and told to smile about it, comment 1. You are not alone. I stayed longer than I should have. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see everything clearly. I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with, Sienna was not the villain I expected. She was not cruel, she was careless. She believed the story Ethan told her, the one where he was successful, wronged, generous, the one where I was an obstacle, not a warning. That made her dangerous in a different way. She encouraged his worst instincts. Spend more, move faster, finish the divorce quickly, start fresh. She did not know she was helping me, because the faster he moved, the less he checked. The more confident he became, the less careful he was, and the more convinced he was that I had already lost. By the time I packed the last of my things and prepared to leave that house for good, Sienna had already started planning renovations, talking about what she wanted to change, talking about their future. I looked around the gray kitchen one last time and felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, only certainty. She thought she had taken my place. What she had actually done was take my seat at the edge of a collapse she could not see yet, and I was finally ready to let her have it. The first sign was not a message or a mistake. It was timing. Ethan started knowing things before I told him. Small things at first, the kind you brush off if you are not paying attention. I mentioned casually that I might look at apartments on the north side of town. 2 days later, Ethan told Lucas that area was too expensive for me. I told my friend I was thinking about pushing back on the house. The very next morning, Ethan warned me it would be pointless. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then it happened again. And again. I had been careful about who I spoke to, careful about what I shared. I knew better than to give Ethan anything directly, but somehow, he always seemed one step ahead. Calm, prepared, like a man who already knew the ending of the conversation. That was when I looked at the one person I still trusted, Rachel Moore. We had been friends since we were teenagers, sleepovers, breakups, college stress, marriage, motherhood. She had been there for every version of me. She was the first person I called the night Ethan asked for a divorce. She cried with me, held my hands, told me I deserved better. She came over with wine, listened while I talked, asked questions, lots of questions. How are you holding up? What are you thinking of doing next? Have you talked to a lawyer? Are you planning to fight him? At the time, it felt like concern. Now I see it for what it was. Data collection. I started testing it without telling anyone. I mentioned a fake plan, something specific enough to track, that I was thinking about staying with my sister for a while. That evening, Ethan asked if I was planning to leave the city. I did not respond. I did not confront him. I just watched. The next test was clearer. I told Rachel I might push for full ownership of the house. I said it casually, like I was still undecided. The next morning, Ethan accused me of trying to take what was not mine. He was angry in a way he had not been before. Defensive, ready. That was when the truth landed. My best friend was feeding him information, not because she was evil, because she wanted to matter. Looking back, the signs had always been there. The way her face lit up when Ethan entered a room, the way she laughed a second too long at his jokes, the way she always asked about him first. How is Ethan doing? Is he okay? This must be hard for him too. She had been in love with my husband longer than I had been married to him, and Ethan knew it. Men like him always do. He used it carefully. Compliments, sympathy, just enough attention to make her feel chosen, just enough hope to keep her loyal. He never promised anything outright. He did not need to. Rachel filled in the gaps herself, and she told him everything. What she did not realize was that I was no longer angry. I was curious. I started telling her exactly what I wanted Ethan to hear. Not lies, fragments, half-plans, emotional reactions. I let her think she was helping him manage me, calm me, predict me. Within hours, Ethan would react. Sometimes with reassurance, sometimes with pressure. Always confirming that the message had been delivered. Rachel thought she was protecting him. She was actually exposing him. This is the part where people expect me to explode. To confront her, to end the friendship in a dramatic scene. That would have been satisfying. It also would have been stupid. Instead, I smiled. I thanked her. I cried when she expected tears. I acted confused when she expected anger. I became exactly what she thought I was, broken. And broken people are underestimated. Here's the hook that matters. When someone believes you are powerless, they stop guarding their words. Rachel started telling me things she thought were harmless. That Ethan was stressed, that he felt pressured, that he was worried about finances, little slips, little cracks. She did not know she was filling in gaps I had already mapped. Meanwhile, Ethan grew more confident. He bragged to people about how easy the divorce was going to be, how I was not fighting, how I had given up. He told Rachel he felt bad for me. That part almost made me laugh. The worst part was watching Lucas get pulled into it. Ethan spoke to him gently, framed everything as concern, told him his mother was struggling, that she was emotional, that he was trying to protect everyone. Children want to believe their parents, especially when one of them sounds calm and reasonable. I could see Lucas pulling away from me, not in anger, in confusion, and that hurt more than any betrayal. But it also clarified something important. This was no longer just about me, so I kept playing the role. Every time Rachel called, I answered. Every time she asked how I was doing, I told her I was tired, lost, unsure. I let her feel useful, needed, and Ethan relaxed. He stopped being careful. He stopped reviewing documents. He stopped asking questions. He let his arrogance take the wheel. If you are still with me at this point, tap the like button. It tells me you understand exactly what is happening here, because this is the moment the story shifts. The betrayal did not break me. It gave me a direct line into the mind of the man who thought he had already won. And once you know how someone thinks, you can predict what they will do next. Rachel eventually realized something was wrong. She asked me one night why Ethan seemed calmer after every conversation with her. I looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe he thinks I am not paying attention." She smiled. She had no idea how right she was. By the time this part of the story ended, I had lost a husband and a best friend. What I gained was far more valuable: clarity. Because when people show you who they really are, the smartest thing you can do is let them keep talking. And that is exactly what I did. There is a moment in every story like this when people ask the same question. Why didn't you leave sooner? The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Because 3 years before Ethan asked for a divorce, I discovered something that changed how I saw everything. And once you see it, you don't run, you wait. It happened on a night so ordinary it almost erased itself from memory. Ethan said he would be working late again. That had become routine. I put Lucas to bed, cleaned the kitchen, and sat down with the company accounts like I had done 100 times before. Not because Ethan asked me to, because I always did. That night, one number felt wrong. Just slightly. Not dramatic, not alarming. The kind of wrong you only notice if you know what everything should look like. I checked it again. Then I followed it. One transfer led to another, then another. Accounts I didn't recognize, timing that didn't line up, payments that looked like movement but created no value. I told myself there had to be an explanation. By midnight, I knew there wasn't. I pulled statements, old loan documents, emails, files Ethan assumed no one ever read. I stayed up until almost 3 in the morning, the house silent except for the sound of paper and my own breathing. By the time the sun came up, I was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by evidence that my husband's success was not success at all. It was debt, layers of it. The house everyone admired had been mortgaged not once, but multiple times. Equity pulled out and spent, lines of credit stacked on top of each other. The business carried loans disguised as growth, vendor balances rolled forward, taxes delayed, payments rearranged, just enough to keep the illusion alive. We did not own what we thought we owned. We were underwater. And then I followed the money. That was the part that hurt the most. Crypto investments that had gone nowhere, gambling losses disguised as business expenses, a rental apartment I had never seen, paid for quietly, consistently, travel charges for trips I was never invited on, luxury purchases hidden inside company accounts. Ethan was not building an empire. He was propping up a lifestyle with borrowed time. I sat there in the early morning light and did the math. Not emotional math, real math. If everything collapsed, there would be nothing left, less than nothing. And here is the hook that matters. At that moment, I understood exactly why Ethan never let me have my name on anything. He didn't want a partner, he wanted a buffer. I could have confronted him, demanded answers, forced a reckoning. That is what people expect. That is what makes sense on the surface. But I knew Ethan. If I confronted him, he would lie, minimize, blame. He would tell me I didn't understand, that I was being dramatic, that everything was under control. And if he knew I knew, he would move faster, hide more, protect himself. So I did something else. I protected the one thing he could never touch, I separated my own assets. Quietly, legally. The money I had earned before him. The inheritance my grandmother left me that was never mixed with marital accounts. I worked with someone I trusted and made sure it was untouchable. Not secret, secure. Then I documented everything. Every loan, every transfer, every pattern. I copied files, printed statements, stored them in places Ethan would never look. I became meticulous in a way that went beyond habit. And then I waited. 3 years. 3 years of watching him dig deeper, of listening to him brag about growth, of sitting beside him at dinners while knowing the foundation was already cracking. I smiled. I nodded. I played the role he expected. Because here is the truth most people don't like to admit. Sometimes leaving immediately is not strength. Sometimes staying and preparing is. If you were in my place, would you have confronted him, or waited? Comment what you would have done, because this is where opinions split. By the time Ethan asked for the divorce, none of this surprised me. His confidence, his demands, his certainty that I had nothing. He wasn't asking for assets, he was demanding debt. He just didn't know it yet. And the reason he didn't know was because he never believed I was capable of understanding any of it. That belief was his greatest protection. And his biggest mistake. I did not stay because I was afraid. I stayed because I needed him to do exactly what he eventually did. Ask for everything, because when someone insists on taking it all, they rarely stop to check what it actually costs. And once they sign for it, there is no going back. The woman he thought was blind had been watching for years, and the moment he decided I was disposable was the moment the ending became inevitable. This wasn't the part where I lost. This was the part where the clock started ticking. Once you know the truth, you have 2 choices. You can confront it, or you can control it. After the night I uncovered the debt, I understood something very clearly. If Ethan ever realized that I knew, the story would end badly for me. Not violently, not loudly, but efficiently. He would lawyer up, move money, rewrite narratives. He was very good at that. So I did the one thing he never expected. I became harmless. I stopped asking questions. I stopped double-checking his numbers. I stopped offering suggestions. I became the quiet wife again. The one who trusted him. The one who smiled at dinner parties and let him talk about growth and expansion while I refilled glasses and nodded. And while he relaxed, I prepared. The first thing I did was protect Lucas. Not emotionally. Financially. Everything I did after that night was filtered through one question. If everything collapses tomorrow, will my son be safe? I reviewed every dollar that was legally mine. Money I had earned before the marriage. Funds that had never been mixed with company accounts. An inheritance that had stayed untouched for years because my grandmother had been very clear. This is yours, not his, not shared. I made sure it stayed that way. I worked quietly with professionals Ethan would never cross paths with. I asked questions without leaving trails. I set up protections that did not have my name as the obvious center. It was not dramatic, it was boring. Paperwork, signatures, waiting periods, that was the point. I did not move money suddenly. I did not make changes that could be traced back to panic. Everything was slow, methodical, legal. Then I started documenting. Not just the big things, everything. Mortgage statements, loan agreements, emails he never deleted, patterns in transfers, the way he rolled debt from one place to another. I learned how he hid problems long enough to move on to the next distraction. I printed copies, stored them in places that were not obvious. A safe deposit box, a folder at a relative's house. Digital backups encrypted and labeled with names no one would ever open out of curiosity. People assume revenge is emotional. This was administrative. And then I waited. That is the part no one likes to talk about. Waiting is uncomfortable. Waiting looks like weakness from the outside. Friends assumed I was in denial, that I was too afraid to face reality, that I was loyal to a fault. Ethan believed that too. He grew more confident by the month. He spent more freely, took on more risk. He stopped hiding things as carefully, because he believed no one around him understood any of it. He forgot that I had been his bookkeeper, forgot that I had watched every version of his success. He forgot me, and being forgotten is powerful. I let him talk, let him brag, let him complain about banks and partners and how no one understood his vision. I listened the way I always had. I said nothing. 3 years passed like that. Then he asked for the divorce, and when he did, I knew the waiting was over. Here is the hook people miss. Ethan did not leave because he stopped loving me. He left because he thought I was empty. He thought I had nothing to fight with, nothing to protect, nothing to lose. When he sat at that kitchen table and told me he wanted the house, the company, the cars, everything, I almost smiled, because that was exactly what I needed him to say. If he had asked for half, the story would have been complicated. If he had negotiated, there would have been discussions, delays, audits, but he wanted everything. Men like Ethan always do. They don't want fairness. They want victory. So I gave him the version of myself he expected. I agreed quickly. I did not argue. I did not demand. I did not threaten. I told him I just wanted things to be easy. For Lucas. For peace. Peace is a very convincing word. He relaxed immediately. That was when I knew the trap was set. Because here is the truth about people who underestimate you. They stop being careful. They sign things faster. They skip explanations. They assume the other person does not understand the consequences. And legal consequences are very patient. By the time lawyers were involved, Ethan was already certain of the outcome. He told people I was not even fighting, that I had given up, that I was emotional but compliant. That narrative spread quickly. I let it, because every person who believed I had lost stopped watching me. And when no one is watching, you can move exactly how you need to. The paperwork came together quietly. Agreements, addendums, disclosures, all standard, all boring, all devastating if you understood what they meant. Ethan didn't. He saw assets. I saw liabilities. He saw ownership. I saw obligation. When he finally sat down to sign what he believed was his victory, he did not look at me once. That was the final confirmation. He truly believed I was finished. What he never understood was this: I did not survive by being loud. I survived by being precise. And precision beats confidence every time. By the time he realized what he had agreed to, it would be too late to change anything. Because the longest games are not won by the person who moves first. They are won by the person who knows exactly when to stop waiting. And I was done waiting. The room was quiet in the way only courtrooms are. Not peaceful, heavy, like every sound mattered more than it should. Ethan walked in smiling. He wore the charcoal suit I had helped him choose years earlier. The expensive watch caught the light when he shook his lawyer's hand. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to collect a reward he believed he had already earned. I looked exactly the way he expected me to look. Tired, smaller, defeated, and that was my final contribution to his mistake. The judge reviewed the case file without expression. Routine questions, routine confirmations. This was not her first divorce. It was just another line on her calendar. When she asked if we had reached an agreement, Ethan's lawyer stood first. He spoke smoothly, proudly. His client would be assuming full ownership of the marital home, the business, and all associated assets. In exchange, I would receive a modest cash settlement and walk away. I did not correct him. I stood next and confirmed it. Yes, Your Honor, that is correct. The judge looked at me then. Really looked. She asked if I understood what I was giving up. The house, the company, the life I had helped build. I nodded. I said I did, and I meant it, because I was not giving up value. I was transferring responsibility. The documents were passed around, page after page. Initial here, sign there. Ethan signed quickly, barely glancing at the text. He had places to be, a future to get back to. I signed slowly, deliberately. Every line I had waited years for. That was when his lawyer froze. I saw it before Ethan did. The hesitation, the page being reread, the subtle shift in posture. A man realizing something is wrong, but hoping it isn't. He leaned toward Ethan and whispered, "Just a few words." Ethan waved him off at first, annoyed. But the lawyer persisted, his voice sharper now, urgent. Ethan finally looked down, really looked. I watched the color drain from his face as the numbers settled in. The mortgages, the loans, the obligations attached to every asset he had demanded, the total debt, the negative value. This wasn't a win. It was a collapse. He stood abruptly, said this wasn't right, that he hadn't understood, that there must be a mistake. The judge stopped him immediately. She asked a simple question. Had he been advised to review the financial disclosures before signing? His lawyer answered for him. Yes, Your Honor. I strongly recommended an independent audit. My client declined. He signed a waiver acknowledging that decision. The waiver was produced. Ethan stared at it like it had betrayed him. The judge turned to him, calm and firm. You were represented by counsel. You declined further review. You signed voluntarily. The agreement stands. He turned to me then. For the first time since this began, he looked afraid. You knew, he said. I met his eyes. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years. Of course I knew. The gavel came down. The marriage was dissolved. The assets were his. The liabilities were his. Everything exactly as he asked for. If this story has held your attention so far, this is the moment to subscribe, because the ending is where everything finally becomes clear. Outside the courtroom, the unraveling happened fast. His girlfriend didn't wait for explanations. She left before the elevator doors even closed. The watch disappeared. The house went on the market and didn't sell. The business defaulted. Creditors called. Lawsuits followed. Within months, the man who once talked about expansion was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. I did not celebrate. I went home. A small apartment, second-hand furniture, quiet, safe. Lucas settled in faster than I expected. He saw the truth without me explaining it. Children always do. He hugged me one night and said he was proud of me. That was worth more than the house ever was. Ethan came once, knocked on my door, asked to talk, asked for help, asked if we could figure something out. I told him the truth. You asked for everything except your son. I gave you exactly what you wanted. Then I closed the door. I am telling you this story not because it is about revenge. It is about patience. It is about what happens when someone underestimates the quiet person in the room. If you believe in stories where intelligence beats arrogance and silence outlasts cruelty, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are coming, and they always end the same way. Not with screaming, but with consequences.